Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome back for another episode. This is Frank Agan, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections. Thanks to those who have tuned in the past, certainly those who are tuned in today. But I certainly appreciate those who have subscribed and continue to refer us people. Today is a guest day, as many of you know, on occasion. Well, about half the time I will just be chatting on different things, and the other half the time I have guests on. Awesome, wonderful people who can really share with us from their perspective, from their expertise, how relationships work, how to make them work better, so on and so forth. Today I have on with me Sarah Elkins. Sarah is, this is unique, Sarah. You're calling from Montana. I don't think I have anybody from Montana. So that's awesome. But Sarah's a communication coach. She's a Gallup certified strengths finder coach as well. Does keynotes, author, and she's a professional musician. And one of the other things she does is she has a summit every year, and we're not going to talk about it today, but I'm going to get her back on. But she has a face-to-face summit called No More Virtual Summit, where she brings together people who generally meet online and create relationships online. And so anyhow, I don't want to steal that thunder, but I do want to really dig into how that all started, but I want to do it a little closer to when she's got planning going for her 2021 summit. So she did have a 2020 summit, and she got it in under the wire with respect to the whole closures with respect to COVID-19. So anyhow, she's a podcaster, and many of the people I talk to are podcasters, and she also has a book. And interestingly enough, they both have the same name. Your story doesn't define you, how you tell them will. And so she helps her listeners and readers understand that the stories they choose to tell and how they choose to tell them, and we all know you can change them up, impact their internal messages and the perception that the people around them have. So Sarah certainly loves to work with remote teams to ensure their relationships are based on knowing and valuing each other's strengths. And she knows that the key to satisfaction and happiness in life is healthy relationships. And as I've indicated in the past, this program is really about relationships, professional relationships for sure. But when does a professional relationship stop and a personal one begin? It's all very murky. So as she was telling me, the key to healthy relationships are self-reflection and communication. So her ultimate goal, not to win the lottery, but her ultimate goal is to help bring self-reflection and positive intention to the workforce in her work as a communication and public speaking coach. Sarah, that's a mouthful. Welcome.
Thanks, Frank.
So you are in Montana. You're not from Montana. You moved there from the DC area. Well, quickly give us your story. You're about stories. Give me a story.
I am. Well, the story goes that I never had any intention of having children or getting married. From the time I was a teenager, I practically raised my younger sister. So I really had no interest in getting married or having kids. And then I met my husband about a year after I moved from Fort Collins, Colorado, my undergrad, to Washington, D.C. for a paid internship. About a year later, I met my husband. And I saw him playing with his niece. He was helping her bait a hook and fish from his father's pier off of a creek in southeastern Virginia. And I thought, gosh, what a waste it would be for him to not have kids. And just a few months later, we were pregnant. So okay. I've explained this before to people. I'm a little impulsive. But the interesting part of that whole story is that I had this idea that I was still going to be really focused on my career, and the baby would just be an addition. And I had super high security clearance, and I was working at NSA with their personnel records because I was doing PeopleSoft implementations. So I'm driving an hour each way from the DC area to the Baltimore area. And when the baby was born, I had a nanny all picked out. I had a high quality pump so that I could continue to breastfeed. And, I had all these ideas about how this was going to work until I got in the car, left the baby behind with the nanny, and cried all the way to work.
Oh, boy.
Totally surprised me. And I kept thinking it would get easier every day that I had to go to work, and it didn't. And finally, I got home one day and I looked at my husband and I said, it just occurred to me, why would we have a baby and have somebody else raise him? That just doesn't make sense to me. So we need to be somewhere where one of us can stay home more. And a week later, he was offered a job in Montana.
Oh,
and
wow.
4 weeks after that, we were in a 24-foot Ryder truck with a 20-foot car trailer, dog and the cat. This is a 1-bedroom apartment that we had to cram into this 24-foot truck. And the Honda with 200 and some thousand miles on it on the trailer, and the dog and cat camped out in the car on the trailer, and the baby between us. And it took us a week to drive across the country. And that was 21 years ago last month.
Wow.
So, and I can't say I never looked back, because it's been very hard here in Montana. It used to be worse. 20 years ago, you really had to be part of a good old boy network to get a job. I had done all these incredible things with PeopleSoft implementations, and I could not get an interview when I went back to work here. I started as basically an executive secretary position, which was something I had done 10 years before, and at half the salary that I was making when I left DC. So it was hard. And as I mentioned, the whole reason I started really understanding networking and building it with intention. I mean, I've always been about relationships, but started building a network with intention through LinkedIn, because otherwise Montana can be a very, very small place.
Interesting. So what has storytelling told you about relationships and just the building of them and the maintaining of them?
Well, think about this. I know neither of us have dated in a long time. We've both been married for a long time, but I have a lot of friends that still date. And one of them actually we were taking a walk together, because that's what we could still do together from 6 feet apart. And we were taking a walk together, and she said, I went out on a date with this guy, and I said, how did it go? She said, he couldn't stop talking about his ex. I said, tell me about that. And she said, well, he told me this story about how his ex had done something really cruel to him. And that's why he was single. And he told a story about, every story came back to his ex. And if you think about that from the perspective of this woman, does he think that she is ever going to be interested in going out with him again? Because if he's talking that badly about his ex, what's going to happen when he talks about her later on?
Right.
And so that alone is a perfect example of how the stories that you tell impact your internal messages, and they impact your relationships with others.
Right.
And how many of us have worked with a complainer that all they do is tell complaining stories? So I woke up this morning, my dog had puked on the carpet and I stepped in it. And, every day there's something like that.
Right.
And of course that's going to impact your relationships negatively. People don't want to be around that all the time. You can vent periodically, but if it's every day.
No, I totally get it. Years ago, I wrote a book called Foundational Networking. And I talked to the notion that skills, because people always want, hey, what's the tips? What are the strategies? And it's like, strategies don't matter. It really comes down to the type of person you are. And one of the things I talk in there is just use as an example. Nobody wants to hang out with a mope, right? They don't. Someone might provide you a little bit of sympathy, but that's going to run out because they, and that, I guess, never really thought about that. That's, really kind of the stories that are out there. So when you work with people as far as coaching them with respect to stories. I mean, is it, when we first met and I read, about stories, I'm like, all right, I didn't want to say, okay, how does this fit? But my notion is, ever been in Toastmasters?
I've been to meetings. I've never joined and participated.
Well, they have a contest in their storytelling, and it's these wild, like, sitting around the campfire stories. And that's the first thing that came to mind. And it's like, okay, how does this relate? So I guess when you're coaching people, go ahead.
Let's back up just a little. Yeah, let's just back up a little. Those big campfire stories. One of the things that people forget is that it's great to tell one of those epic "I almost died" stories, or the epic "I met the celebrity and this is what happened" stories. It's fun to have a story like that. It's entertaining. And you may even be somewhat persuasive with one of those epic stories. But if you really want to connect and you tell the right story, you're going to have the memories of the person in front of you get triggered so that they will then want to tell a story to you.
Okay.
So that's, if you think about a story that is more meaningful, less epic and more meaningful. So for instance, when I finally hit my limit on coming back from Baltimore and walking up those 3 flights of stairs into my apartment in Washington, D.C., and the nanny would throw the baby into my arms so that I could nurse him, because she would have waited to feed him so that I could nurse when I got home. And I vividly remember this moment of sitting down on my couch. She left. My husband wasn't home yet from work. And I called my mom, and I burst into tears when she answered the phone. And she's a baby nurse, and she's also a worrier. And as my friend Shelley Brown says, she goes from 0 to catastrophe in 0.5 seconds, right? So my mom immediately is like, "What's wrong?" Because she doesn't hear me cry often. And she said, "Is the baby okay?" I'm like, he's fine. And she said, "Are you okay?" And I'm sobbing, those wrenching, I can't even breathe kind of sobs. And she said, "Please tell me what's wrong. You're freaking me out." And I looked down at this baby and I said, "It's just that now I know how much you love me."
Oh, that's a great story.
And now we're both crying, of course. And when I tell that story, I guarantee I can see it in your eyes, because we're doing a Zoom for this recording. I can see it in your eyes that you had a memory triggered about a time when you looked at one of your 3 and felt that same ache in your heart of deep, deep, painful love.
Well, it's interesting you do say that, because I said that after my son was born, my oldest. I said, at that moment in time, you realize how much your parents love you. And you cannot, you have no idea until that happens. You have no idea. And that's why kids don't appreciate their parents until they are parents, for that reason.
And if you think about it, so I tell this story. Is this an epic story? Did I almost die? No. So when I tell that story, my intention isn't just for entertainment value. My intention is to trigger your memories. Because what happens if you do it right and you take a step back and listen to their story, you've created a much more significant relationship with that person. Even if you don't like them, you've created a deeper relationship with them.
So when you coach people on storytelling, what are some of the things you'll share with them or coach them to do? Because not everybody has that. I've never breastfed. So just an admission.
But you could relate to that exhaustion of being a new parent.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah.
And fatigue. Well, this is why I wrote the book, is because a lot of people don't remember those stories. They don't know to tell them, much less how to tell them. And so one of the things I love to do with my coaching clients is help them create a story portfolio. And we start talking about particular eras in their lives that felt like they were big changes in their lives. So for instance, 7th grade, almost everyone went through a significant personal change in 7th grade. And usually it's negative. I know almost every girl I know, their confidence tanked in 7th grade. And they had the mean girl episodes, and teachers who didn't understand them. And so seventh grade could be an era. And then I help my clients kind of pinpoint a specific experience that happened during that time that can demonstrate why that era was so pivotal in their lives. And what's interesting about it is that not only are we creating the story portfolio so that when you're leading or when you're networking, you have some level of vulnerability to share with somebody so you can connect. So that's a great byproduct of this story portfolio, which the book walks you through creating yours. And I tell a story with the intention of triggering memories of the reader. And beyond that, what's interesting is I have a whole chapter on how these stories affect your internal messages, which, as you said before we hit record, our relationships with ourselves are the key. If we don't have a good relationship with ourselves, we're not going to have a good relationship with somebody else. And when we can uncover where those damaging internal messages happened, we can shift how we see them. So I'll give you an example. One of my coaching clients always struggled with this feeling that she wasn't smart enough. She always just felt like she just wasn't that bright. And she was 50 when I started working with her. She's my age now. So this is about 5 years ago. She was 50 when I started working with her. And I said, I'm just curious, who told you weren't very bright? She said, well, my mom. I said, your mom told you weren't very bright? She said, yeah. And I said, tell me about that. She said, well, she told me I wasn't very bright, but that I would marry well because I was very sweet. And I said, wow, well, let's dig into that a little bit. Where were you sitting? Do you remember what your mom was wearing? Was she in an apron? Because she was a very traditional kind of household mom. And this was, a while back. And so this woman came down to, the story happened when she was 10 years old. And she had come home from school, likely with a bad math grade. All of her other grades were reasonable, average, but reasonable. Mm-hmm. But she came home with one bad math grade. And she came to this realization that her mother was really unhappy at that point in her life. She felt insignificant. She felt irrelevant because she was just an at-home mom. And she knew that she was bright enough and driven enough to do something more with her life. But she felt really unempowered at this point because she was raising these kids. And I said, do you think that so we've gone into this story. She's imagining herself at her kitchen table. She's imagining what her mom looks like and where she's standing, and even the wallpaper on the walls. And I said, so your mom was going through a tough time. She really felt like she was insecure and not doing what she knew she had the capacity to do. And I said, do you think maybe she was projecting her insecurities on you because you got one bad grade? It changed everything for her. It made her realize that her mom didn't actually believe she wasn't very bright. Her mom would not have even remembered saying that to her because she was in that bad place in her life at that time. And we don't intentionally do damage to our kids like that, giving them a message that they'll hold on till they're 50. I mean, and it was within 24 hours of us getting to this point of realizing that that's where that message came from. She graduated from nursing school, 4-year nursing school, in her 40s, summa cum laude. This is not somebody who's not bright. And tell that story to 3 people with all the context. And then tomorrow, send me a message, let me know how you're feeling. And the next day, I got the most beautiful text message about how empowered she felt, that she realized that she had been holding on to this awful, damaging message for absolutely no reason.
Interesting. Now, when you talk about stories, I mean, are there particular emotions that you try and pull out, or does it change from person to person? When I go out and speak, I always try and take people through the range of emotions. I want them to laugh. Mm-hmm. I want them to feel, not sorrow, but it's not a one-trick pony, right? It's lots of things.
Well, when I'm working with a client, I really encourage them to look at all different stories from their lives, the good and the bad.
Right.
So, and there's always a little grief with the joy, whatever you're doing.
Right.
Whether that's fear that it's going to end, so you grieve it ending before it even ends, or whether something negative had to happen in order for us to get to the place of happiness. Did you have to go through a nasty divorce to find self-fulfillment afterward?
Right.
But we really talk about very specific experiences, because your life isn't a linear timeline of personal experience of growth. Everything adds up to get to where you are now, but you could be anywhere on that timeline when you are sharing that story again.
Right. Interesting. Well, let's switch gears for a minute. Let's talk about your business. Obviously, you work with people. How would we be able to recognize a good candidate for you? Or I guess a better way of putting it is, somebody's listening right now. Who would they be? I guess would be.
Well, I would start with, you are somebody who wants to lead effectively, and you know that you have the potential to really connect with people, to lead in a positive way. Mm-hmm. But you're not really sure what stories to share in order to create the relationships that you have to create. So for instance, I did a podcast episode with Jonathan Endy, who's the founder and CEO of Seamless Docs, a big company that's doing online forms for government agencies. Mm-hmm. And he has this potential to be an amazing leader and speaker, but he doesn't know which stories to tell. He doesn't know which details to use in those stories, whether that's a media interview, a podcast, interviewing somebody for a job, mm-hmm. or being interviewed for somebody who wants to work for him and he wants that person to work for him. Being able to create that story portfolio and know which details to share and how to share them can completely change the dynamic of how you lead in such a positive way. Part of what I do is active listening strategies. So as I said, telling a story for entertainment is one thing, and persuasion is one thing. But if you're telling a story to lead and to connect, you also have to know how to observe and listen.
Gotcha. Are your clients coming to you mainly for personal reasons, business reasons, combination of both?
I always tell people, you really can't separate your personal and professional lives. It's
True.
Just not possible.
True.
Most people come to me for professional reasons. Like I have a medical practitioner who was struggling in her relationship with her nurse team. And so she came to me for that, but she told me within, a couple months of working together, she said her relationship with her husband had improved.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it is all interlinked, especially nowadays. Mm-hmm. There was a time where, well, at least my parents, went off to work and then came home, right? It was 5:30, 6 o'clock. And it was just, there was this clear cutoff. Anymore, it's like, okay, I'm stopping out to go to my kid's school or whatever it might be. And so then you got to work later, and it's just, it's so murky now. Our clients are our friends, and
no matter what you are doing, whether you're face-to-face or online, you have to represent yourself well. You have to be an ambassador for yourself, no matter who you're talking to, because everything crosses over now in a way that, like you said, it didn't used to do that, but it does now. I mean, your personal brand is your personal brand, whether you're at work or at a brewery with your friends.
Right. Well, it's, we are on 24 hours a day. We're available 24 hours a day, mm-hmm. to a degree, 16 for sure. My wife has a corporate job, and she's getting texts from her boss Saturday morning, and there's multiple people who are involved in a project, and, Friday night, Saturday morning, it just doesn't end. And not that any one person is constantly after her, but there's always somebody wanting something. So,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's the best way for people to get a hold of you? Someone listening.
Oh, definitely my website.
Okay.
It's elkinsconsulting.com.
Okay.
Just like it sounds, ELKINS consulting.com. My book is Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. And it's also the name of my podcast.
Okay.
And I love doing my StrengthsFinder coaching because I've been able to combine that whole storytelling with strengths. My tagline for that is your strengths are your stories. And what I love to do with my coaching clients using strengths is help them be able to demonstrate their strengths through the stories that they share rather than telling people what their strengths are. So for instance, if you want to tell people you're a great cook, there's no reason for them to believe you.
Right.
But unless you get to cook for them, there's no reason for them to believe you. But if you can tell a story about a party you had where you cooked and you talk about the salmon that you wiped down with vinegar and then seasoned with garlic salt and a little bit of lemon pepper and some dill and butter, and you put it on the grill and it came off so perfectly with the Israeli couscous that you roasted and then cooked. And, you tell a story like that and people will be like, oh, okay, I'm hungry now.
Yeah.
So I like to do that. I like to help people, especially people who are interviewing, to be able to demonstrate their strengths and their skills through a story rather than telling people I'm a good team player.
Okay. I will get as much as that with your website and podcast in the show notes so people don't have to write it down. But I do appreciate your time on the program today.
Well, thank you, Frank. I really appreciate you having me on today. It was such a treat to get to know you.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.